Is greedflation a thing? What lessons should we learn from FDR's internment camps? And are tenants really the breadwinners for landlords? We'll discuss these questions and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we gather takes that we see in our social media feeds. We critique them or praise them. My name is Britt. I'm here with my co-host Donnie. Before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, comment. You can find us on Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram and Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. And without further ado, let's get into the first of our takes. So we've got one from dictionary.com and Elizabeth Warren. So dictionary.com added a new term called greedflation to their dictionary, and it's defined as a rise in prices, rents, or the like that is not due to market pressure or any other factor organic to the economy, but is caused by corporate executives or boards of directors, property owners, etc., solely to increase profits that are already healthy or excessive. And Elizabeth Warren retweets this, writing, "Greedflation, also known as working people are paying the price for corporate greed." What do you think? Is this a helpful term?
I honestly don't even believe that this has to be a meme or something that it got added. There's no way that that's real, or dictionary.com is just giving up any sort of standards of having a semblance of realism. Then again, you know, AP, like the writing guide, has done a couple.
Oh, it's in dictionary.com, brother.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, it's a ridiculous term because, well, and obviously her take is just ridiculous in general. Because the moment you start to actually understand what inflation is and what causes inflation, then you recognize that this nebulous concept of greedflation is so unbelievably small percent, like a small percent of what actual inflation you would be realizing, right? So let's take the idea of greedflation at, the best case. Okay, there are some cases in which there is a profit to be generated by corporations that are taking advantage of universal inflation and they are raising their own margins. Let's say that that's the case. The percent that would be contributing to an overall price increase for the average human and the average, buyer is marginally small, because for the first point, you have to already have a level of inflation that is noticeable for prices to be increasing to begin with. This would be and this of course would be inflation in most every area, probably. So one company choosing to capitalize on this and take advantage by increasing their margins during this time means that they would only even have a sliver of the population. They would only have a sliver of the categories of the economy that are experiencing inflation and a sliver of the contribution to overall inflation numbers. There's no way at which all of the mega corporations would be able to do this at the same time, because then you're just going to have the point at which, it's a time of high inflation, people aren't buying as much. The first company that lowers their prices and doesn't, and reduces their margins is going to get all the business. So it's an absurd premise to think that every corporation has agreed to magically, to raise their own prices during a time of inflation. So first, but of course, the main thing there is that you already have to have inflation to begin with for this to even be a thing. So even at its best, this concept of greedflation is reliant upon the fact that the government is diluting your currency to begin with. It has to have that veneer. Otherwise, you're literally just talking about, margins of profit, at which point every company has profit margins. That way they can grow. That way people can make a living. So it's just, even if you were to sort of give the most generous interpretation of what greedflation is, which is just so stupid, it's reliant on government action of devaluing your currency. And at that point, it's doing a less powerful version of what the government is doing.
Yes. I actually, as with many of the critiques that leftists have of capitalism, and maybe just the moral aspect of it, like, it's greedy, or you believe in infinite growth, or whatever it is, like, it's like, okay, they get something sort of right, because they're like correctly diagnosing that there is an issue, and then they proceed to prescribe a solution that is from the person or the entity that is creating the problem in the first place. And so greedflation, like, what a fun little term. Terrible when it's used to describe the people that are actually producing things. Like, the only way for stuff to get better is for there to be more things produced at better and better rates. A lot of people have this, like, they hear inflation, and because the way it plays out in their lives is higher cost, and the person that they can see directly responsible for costs is, the business owner that they're purchasing it from, they automatically just assume it's like, well, they're the ones charging more. Like if everyone could just choose to not charge more. But the reality of the fact is that we print trillions of dollars every year. When you print trillions of dollars, when you inflate the money supply, businesses have to charge more in order for them to just be able to actually repurchase product at some point, right? So when you follow the flow of money all the way to its source, right? Like money starts somewhere, it's created somewhere, and then it's assigned value and assigned to goods. But the more money that we have it backwards, the more money we print, it's not directly correlated to how much stuff we've got. We try and create stuff to correlate to how much money we've printed, which results in all these crazy imbalances and problems. And so because all these companies have this pressure, they have to increase the prices just to exist. And like you were saying, even in the best scenario where there is like, hey, they're taking advantage of a situation that already exists, it's like, well, yeah, that could exist. That could be a problem. It's definitely not going to be like at the macro level that everyone experiences it at. The most of the people are experiencing it because of the actual printing of the money. And that printing of money is actually greed, right? Like it's the government being greedy. The government saying, hey, we're going to be greedy towards our future children, our future grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. We're going to steal their future, and we're also going to steal your future savings. So the fact of the matter is when inflation really is at like 18 to 20%, if you include all types of goods in the calculus, the fact of the matter is that when you earn $100 today, in a year from now, that $100 was only going to be able to buy what the equivalent of $80 is today. So they're systematically destroying your savings and everything that you've earned. They're borrowing from the future to pay for things today that they don't necessarily need, that benefits them, and that puts you in a worse spot. That is actually greed. Like inflation is greedy, but it's greed on behalf of the people that don't produce anything. If someone is charging you for something and they've produced it and you voluntarily choose to buy it, like that's an awesome thing. It's also awesome when someone is trying to charge too much for something that they've produced and someone else comes in and is like, oh, like I can sell this for cheaper and for better than this other person. It keeps prices artificially low, not artificially low, organically low, as this person says. But when you artificially inflate the money supply, it surprise, surprise, it artificially increases the prices as well because they have to be increased in order to exist.
The one nitpick thing on this definition I would say that I don't like as well is a rise in prices, rents, or the like that is not due to market pressure or any other factor organic to the economy, but is caused by corporate executives, boards. When he was talking about or any other factor organic to the economy, like that's just such a nebulous term because the economy is human action, right? And the idea of
natural to gravity.
Yeah, right. And so it's like, what are you defining there? Is like, would not the decisions of corporate executives and boards, even if you were saying, oh, they're just deciding to be greedy all of a sudden, wouldn't that be part or organically part of the economy? Because the economy is just human action. It's just how people interact with each other and exchange goods and services. It's not this, people think of the economy in terms of, oh, it has to do with money and stuff. It's like, well, money's a part of it, but literally the economy is just human decisions. So I think not only is it a stupid term and definition that shouldn't really be used in any sense, it's also just an inaccurate one. It's a useless term that does not define anything well, and it's clearly meant to give some form of legitimacy to an ideology rather than actually helping define something or clarify something. When you create a word and you shape language, you're often shaping the debate, right? If you don't have a term for something, or you create a term to mean something, or you redefine the term for something, you control the very medium in which people's ideas are able to be discussed and exchanged. So, like, it's why we always complain about the reframing of the word racism to be, being biased against people from a place of privilege or power, which is just stupid. No, racism is, viewing other people based on their race as lesser than you. Like that's racism. It doesn't have to be from a place of position or power or privilege or anything like that, or power. And so in the same way, this just seems like they're like, oh, let's just throw in more words to scope the shape of the debate. Where also what they did with the Harvard president. I don't remember the absurd term that they threw around there, but it was just another way to get around plagiarism, and it was, and so they'll just throw in words to say, oh, well, if we keep using inflation, people eventually will learn that inflation has a real definition, that actually isn't necessarily really caused by corporate greed at all. So we're going to start greedflation, which is just so dumb.
What drives me nuts about a lot of these takes and stuff is that, like, it's the lack of time horizon, because back when when President Trump signed in the CARES Act, and it authorized the printing of crazy amounts of money to fund, this caring thing that we were going to do for all these different people in the country. The people that said, hey, like, this is going to cause really bad inflation and your money is going to be worth less, and it's going to be worth a lot less, actually. 6 months after they implemented the whole deal and they dumped all this money everywhere and there wasn't a bunch of inflation, people were saying, like, oh, we'll see, like, it didn't actually cause any problems. But it's like, yeah, like, it takes a bit of time for the money to circulate. The velocity of money is not like instant in terms of its ability to affect how market conditions and prices go. And so it's like, yeah, it went into the market, it circulated, and within about 2.5 years, now we got this crazy amount of inflation that's crushing everyone. And they have the gall to go back and be like, oh, well, it's just people's greed. It's like, well, no, we've been telling you all along that there was like a pretty clear like lever that if you pull it, it's going to result in these issues. But they're never going to admit it because it benefits the people. I mean, Elizabeth Warren and all the people that voted for it all have friends somewhere in the government or in some company somewhere that had their hands in that big pile. I think it was $6 trillion or whatever it was at the end of the day, that they were going to be able to get out of it. And so the people who receive the money first are the ones that benefit because they get 100% of the spending power. The people that, they spend their money with get a little bit less of the spending power. But eventually, once that money trickles all the way down through and it gets to the normal average person, the people at the top have reaped 100% of the benefits and you get like 50% of it. And then even that 50% that you do get is going to be worth less and less and less as years go on.
And to your point about, people's thought process and all this, the leftists will always just plug their ears and not listen to any reasonable thing about the economy and just cry corporate greed. The frustrating ones to me are the right people, the people who, in particular, Trump supporters, who were getting mad at Thomas Massie for, not for opposing the big bailout and the COVID check stuff and saying he needs to be kicked from the Republican Party, who are now mad about Biden's America and Biden's inflation. And it's like, yeah, Biden certainly helped, but your boy is the one who started it. And Thomas Massie was protesting Trump doing something that Biden would continue to do.
Yep. All right. Our next post is from the New York Post, and it's a headline about the British Health Services, and it reads, "Trans women's milk is as good as breast milk, British health officials say." What do you think, Donnie?
Your
British health guys have got it?
Yeah, I was going to say your first mistake would be trusting anything a British person says. Sorry, I had to dunk on the Brits there.
Okay, we beat them a few times, so.
Yeah, I was going to say they lost all rights after 1776, my friend. No, it's an absurd posit to make. And I haven't seen this whole article. I don't know what loops they would have to jump through to justify this. But the reality is that if you're talking, I mean, again, if they're talking trans women, are they talking men?
They're talking men women? That are saying they're women.
Yeah.
The mechanism for how they produce milk is they use hormones to try and cause their chest to lactate.
Yeah,
it's definitely not milk, but yeah.
Yeah. So what's absurd about this? So let's look at it in a few stages. The first being, let's assume for the sake of argument that if you were able to stimulate this response in a biological male through unnatural means, like through hormone injections or some kind of procedure, you are intentionally creating something that is not natural and that is not plentiful and that it is not designed to do. You are provoking an atypical response out. So from the outset, the idea of saying just as good is not that useful, because it'd be like saying, for instance, well, actually, beef that's grown in the Sahara Desert is just as good hamburger meat as those grown on a farm. where it's like, okay, well, how'd you do that? Well, we spent millions of dollars to bring out all the landscaping to make it cool, to make it plausible to have the cow to raise and to eat and to be slaughtered and to be, and it's like, okay, you spent so many more resources to get the same thing, that to say it's just as good, even if you were talking and you were technically correct about the quality of the thing itself, is such it's such a misleading thing to say to begin with. But then clearly the output of the actual milk is not the same, is not as good, is not as healthy. And I'm 100% sure that this is something that you would not be able to definitively state without years and years of actual research and studies done that would verify this thing. And it's very interesting that this kind of report would come out when it's very politically expedient to do so.
Yes. This is, people talk about the slippery slope fallacy all the time when it comes to things with gender or LGBTQ stuff. And I was, you conservatives or you Christians or whatever, like you guys are just worried that it's going to be this way and affect it this way, but we really just want these type of rights or whatever. But the fact of the matter is when you destroy a pillar of the human not even experience, just human reality, which is knowing the difference between man and women, which is like one of the most fundamental truths. It's like, it's almost more true than truth itself, because you can't exist. Like there's no more humans if humans are not able to identify whether someone is a man or a woman. Like that understanding is essential to procreation and our species continuing. But when you destroy that, it inevitably is going to lead to these crazy things that they say here. I love the point that you're making, that when they say, trans woman milk is as good as breast milk, even if it was a 1-for-1 match all the way down to the molecule, like it's still not as good because it's not natural and you have to produce the response. Like that is so true. And one of the things that's like speaking as a new father, and learning about how women's bodies and babies' bodies like work together to make everything happen. Like there is no way that they can produce milk in the same way that an actual woman's body can do so. Like I tell people this, but like if a scientist developed a filter as good as the placenta during that, that exists, that filters out different types of bad things when a woman is pregnant, like they would win the Nobel Peace Prize, because it's a freaking amazing thing that is designed, in my belief, by God, and it works. It's basically magic. Like no one can ever design that. It's the same thing with breast milk. Like a baby's saliva, it's nuts, and we don't exactly know all of the mechanisms for how this works, but a woman's breast milk will change based on the saliva from the kid. So if the kid is a little bit sick, or maybe they need a little bit more of this nutrient or that nutrient, like the woman's breast is able to sense that, and then her body will respond to that stimulus and create and change the milk that's produced, which is really freaking amazing. Or when a woman is starting to feel a little bit under the weather, or maybe is exposed to a virus or something, the milk will actually create antibodies custom fitted to addressing that illness within the baby. And that's why babies many times don't get sick, even though the parents do. And so there's just no way, like you're saying, the time horizon for this study is not long enough for them to even be able to claim this. Also, like everyone pretty much universally agrees that that formula is not as good as breastfeeding. And I'm not knocking, like I have friends that have had to formula feed. I've had friends that have chosen to formula feed. Like I'm not knocking that or anything like that. But basically, everyone agrees that like formula feeding versus breastfeeding, there's an actual difference there. And no one would say that, even though you can quantify that formula feeding, like you're saying, is not a 1-for-1, but like does the same thing of filling the kid and nourishing them. Like it's still not as good. Like no one would say it's as good as breast milk, even though it functionally does the same thing. And so it's just really terrifying to see, like, we knock down one pillar of society and how marriages are supposed to work. And then suddenly we're now at this point where we're literally, I mean, we've been killing little babies for a long time as a society, but now even the babies that are alive, like we're malnourishing them, giving them less than optimal, and then claiming with a smile on our faces that's okay. This is a terrible take. And I hope that, someday they're going to look back on this in the same way that when I was at this garage sale, like in the 1950s, 9 out of 10 surgeons choose to smoke Marlboro. It's like they're going to look at it this way. And as long as we don't obviously have like a 1984 style level of Ministry of Truth, I guess. But hopefully we'll look back on this and look at it as crazy talk.
Completely agree.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a tweet thread. Starts out with Riley Gaines, and then ends with another Riley. MD. So Riley Gaines writes, Mael, I don't know how to say their last name, won a state title in girls high jump this past weekend in New Hampshire. A male is actually a male, not a female. He won the women's category with a 5'2" jump. This is 10 inches lower than the best boys high jump at 6 foot. Another less than mediocre man atop a woman's podium. He must be so proud. And then Adam Krigler responds, that's the thing. He is proud, trying to make the point that it's a mental disease. And then Riley MD responds to both of these folks saying, I'd be proud too if I practiced really hard and tried my best. Sports is so much bigger than winning and losing, but you would deprive kids of opportunities to learn about teamwork, dedication, and sportsmanship just because seeing a trans person succeed makes you uncomfortable. We're critiquing Riley MD's post. What do you think about her point?
It's so dumb. Like, what I hate is when people shift the goalpost on something like this, where you the entire institution of sports and competition is based around the premise of taking one group of the same thing, all doing the same action, and seeing of the same people who can do the same thing the best. That is, at its, sort of base, you just want to see like what can do X the most impressively or the best. And then you have different divisions and different leagues. That's why we have, for instance, like children's leagues for things like chess versus just throwing all kids and all adults in the same chess competition, right? Yeah. Because it's like, oh, cool. Like someone whose brain is fully formed destroyed someone whose brain has not fully formed. That's not that interesting. It's not that cool to see. But when you see like, oh, these two kids who are of the same age and this person is able to play this tactically, that is impressive. That is cool. And so similarly, when we have divisions of sports between men and women, it's because we want to see things like, oh, what's the cool comparative skill levels here? And so again, when it comes to sports and competitions, that is the point of sports, is competition. It is winning and losing. And there are sub attributes within competitions that are good and meaningful. Making sure that winning isn't everything from your own personal perspective in terms of what you're valuing and how you are living your life. Yeah, that can be a healthy thing to do. But when it comes to the competition, winning is the point. That is the point of competition. And so to say, well, it's not everything for everyone. It's like, okay, that's fine. But when it comes to competition, that is what it's about. And that is what the heart of the thing is. And so it's so crazy when you're trying to move the goalpost over something that is very strictly defined as competition. That's what sports competition is for. It's why there's a difference, for instance, between Olympic weightlifting and going to the gym and weightlifting, right? Like improving yourself is, in a non-competitive setting is not the same as competing in a lifting competition. There's a difference because one is about winning and the other is about self-improvement. They can both be positive and good, but don't change the narrative. And so when this person then accuses, the other for saying like, oh, but you just would, you would only change it because it's a trans, or making it an identity critique. It's just very ironic coming, because it's like the only reason why you have a problem with the idea of competition and winning and losing is because it serves your ideology in this purpose. So it's very much a projection.
We've lost in our society just so much honor. And like this person saying, well, sports is so much bigger than winning and losing. Like that's true. And I would agree with that. But the values that are bigger than winning and losing, like still call people to the higher standard that makes it not appropriate for a man to compete in a woman's competition. And that's in the realm of like discipline, of making rising to the occasion and having honor against your opponents. Like there is no honor in someone that has a natural, massive biological advantage over their competitors from going in and competing with them. I used to play, I played on like a tournament AAU basketball team. So we'd like travel around and play games and stuff. And we were all dudes. But one time we were short 2 guys on our roster. And so the coach's 2 daughters actually filled in and played with us at a tournament. And like that was okay and honorable in a way, because it was 2 women who have a biological disadvantage entering into, basically competing against men And like, if they did great, that's awesome. But we were naturally at a disadvantage because of them. And that's not to say that they weren't awesome or did good, but like, we just had to fill the spot. And we had to have people, and we had to work around that. There is more honor in that than it is if I decided at 16 years old to go play in, a basketball tournament for little girls of age 7. It's like, yeah, I would be able to 1-on-5 all of those girls and like score 100 points. They would score nothing. Like, there's no honor in that type of competition, and honor drives us to elevate. And one of the things that's really funny about this, like, I agree that like there are concepts like teamwork and stuff like that are on par with winning, but they mean nothing if there's not a goal of trying to accomplish winning. And what's funny about this person's post is that the competition that this trans person entered was like a single person's event. Like, it didn't even have necessary teamwork. And that's not to say that you don't work as a team or whatever to like build your skills for the high jump or anything like that. But it wasn't like it was a team basketball game or something like that. So it's just really unfortunate. Like, yes, sports is so much bigger than winning and losing, but the qualities and the values that are bigger than that are still not okay with men competing in women's sports and punching downwards. And that sounds sexist or whatever, but it's just a fact of biological reality, right? That men have certain types of giftings physically that women do not, and that there's a major difference. Like, I was thinking about the I think it was like the Australian college soccer team played the Women's World Cup Championship team, and they beat them like crazy. Like, I think they had to retire from the game because it was like, oh, we're scoring like 12 points to 0 or something like that, and they called it quits. So it's like there's a massive difference in skill level, and there is no honor in punching down, and that's essentially what's happening when you allow men to compete in women's sports. Allowing women to compete in men's sports, like, I'm still not a big fan of that, but it's at least a little bit more honorable, and it elevates at least the women in that way. When you have a man compete in women's sports, no one is elevated; everyone is pushed downward.
Yeah, it boils down to even the idea that all groups need to be all things to all people, and all institutions need to be all things to all people. And I mean, first of all, like, we shouldn't even be in the space where kids are identifying as trans one way or the other.
Yes.
But if they are doing that and they want to compete, they should be competing within the categories that we make. And so if you are identifying as a woman but you are biologically a man, then that is the biological reason why we separate men and women's leagues. We don't separate men and women's leagues because cooties, like we separate these leagues because of the biological reality. So even if you affirm someone's identity as like, well, they mentally do believe they are a woman and they have the right to that gender identity, even if that's your perspective, you think that their gender identity is a woman even though they were born biologically a man, you have to recognize that their sex as a male was born that way. Just whether you like it or not, no matter how they identified, they were born that way. And that born biological reality is the distinction we make in men and women's sports. We're not making a men and women's sports based on your modern gender ideology of how people perceive the world in those ways. We're making them distinctly for the biological reasons. And so if the individual who views themselves as a trans woman wants to learn teamwork, dedication, sportsmanship, they are welcome to do so on the team that will accept them, which would be the men's team. Now, they're going to say, oh, I don't feel comfortable with that. But that is their own projection. And the world cannot try to compromise on reality and truth and the entire institutions we've made for an individual. It's like, if I really don't like the fact that if I go to the YMCA and want to run on the track, there are other people there. We don't get to, I don't get to go in and demand the YMCA makes a special Donnie only hour. Like, I don't get to go in and make it so that only I can run on the track for that hour because I'm uncomfortable with other people being up there. Either I have to learn to adapt or I don't use that thing. And so, again, learning teamwork, dedication, and sportsmanship through sports can be a great avenue, but you don't get to shape the entire field to your particular perception and experience, particularly when it flies in the face of biological realities.
Absolutely. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a user and they write, realizing that my landlord is living my paycheck to my paycheck is insane. One time I sent rent later in the evening on the first, and he complained because the bank overdrafted him on his mortgage. I am the main breadwinner in my landlord's family. What do you think about this?
It's such a dumb. I mean, like the way that it's perceiving, well, one, you shouldn't live paycheck to paycheck, even if you're a landlord, even if you can't. But
Yes.
but what highlights this to me is almost that this take in and of itself doesn't really say much. So I don't have as much of a perspective. Is this a good or a bad take? I don't really think it's a good or a bad take. He's just kind of noticing things. And if anything, this should actually highlight the fact that most landlords are not wealthy conglomerates. People think like, oh, landlord, oh, you're some rich person, you're off in the countryside with your second house. Most landlords are people who were able to purchase a second home without selling their first and are now renting out their second home. That is the majority of people. And when you think about it in that way, all of the policies that you're saying, oh, well, they can afford it, become a little bit more like, oh, maybe they can't afford it. And where this take stops, and what I would hope is his awakening, because he's obviously quite shocked by this realization, like, oh, my landlord is living my paycheck to my paycheck, is that the person who is a landlord who's providing this person housing, because if his landlord did not have enough money to pay for his own house, he certainly wouldn't have the money to support and pay for a second house upkeep to rent out. So if that's the level and the margins that you're on, you recognize that all these increasing regulations and permits and taxes and fees, all of these things that put burden on landlords, means that you drive out the small landlords from the market and you consolidate the market into the big corporate conglomerates that will raise prices on you and that will make it worse for you, rather than having a diversified market of individual landlords who can rent out houses, who can be more flexible, who can make the average price lower with competition, things like that. So this take, I mean, that I am the main breadwinner in my landlord's family, that's kind of a stupid take, and we can focus on why that's wrong and dumb. But ultimately, he doesn't come to recognize what I hope he would, which is that actually your landlord, relies on the money that you give in order to make other payments, because he also is, the value he's providing you is worth what you are paying him, essentially. So you're talking about, oh, I'm the breadwinner in his family. But what you're failing to recognize is that he is the breadwinner because he's providing you a service that you're paying for, right? His service is having basically done the work required beforehand in the form of dollars to buy a house that allows him to rent it out. Dollars, in a sense, are just IOUs of work having been done,
Yes.
in an ideal society, right? In an ideal way, when we're moving away from inflation, let's just, for the sake of argument, just talk about dollars sort of in their ideal form. The dollar is an IOU, right? So someone did work somewhere, and this dollar represents that value. And as long as you haven't gotten that dollar by way of by illegitimate means, then work was done, and you are the benefactor of that work. And so this applies for like landlords and renters who, for instance, maybe they're not currently producing something other than the home and the housing and the shelter and the work that goes into that. But if they're not currently producing, they still had the IOUs from work that was done at one point to buy the home to begin with, to have its creation and continued existence be feasible for someone else to use and live in. But this is also true for things like inheritance, where people talk about like, oh man, what about, the sons of billionaires who they didn't even do any work and they get all this money. It's like, well, sure, that's like, they didn't have to do that work, and maybe it's better that they did do work to get their money, but it's still better that the work was done to begin with, because all of the money inherited from that billionaire to the son was work that the billionaire provided. So if you were to have a 100% inheritance tax, for instance, you decrease the incentive for people to do things that create IOUs. And so you just decrease the incentive for work to be done. And so in the same way, with landlords and things like that, saying like, wow, he doesn't even work and I'm providing him all his paychecks. It's like, well, no, if you think that that's the perceptive, your perception, you're completely missing the point of the work that was done before to secure you even having that home to begin with. And now you're just merely paying back the person who invested all of that work into something that you are benefiting from.
Yeah, like people that are very much on the left will kind of hate on profits and hate on other stuff, and that generates revenue. And this scenario that this guy is living in, where the landlord is not only not making money but losing money on this transaction, because yeah, like the rent pays the mortgage, but the landlord is also responsible for all of the depreciation of the property, the repair work, the actual property taxes, and various things, and maybe those are calculating the mortgage. But basically, the guy that owns that house is losing money each month. This is one of the rare times in society where someone can buy a service at cost or at a loss. Buy it at a loss to the person that's selling it. And that's because of the mechanism of property for most people that own and do landlord stuff. Like, what they're looking at is the value of the property over 30 years. So they're like, hey, maybe I can get an asset that as long as I can maintain the mortgage on it in 30 years, the rate of return is going to be better than putting my money in the stock market, right? So this guy who's commenting on this is directly benefiting from getting a service, which is housing, at cost. Like, this is quite literally, for this whatever level of housing that he desires, this is the cheapest he can get at it. It's never going to be better than what he gets it right now, and it be sustainable. Like, this is the bare minimum sustainable. It's not even really sustainable in a way, because it's being subsidized by the property owner's other sources of incomes in some form or fashion, right? So this is a great scenario, and that's one of the benefits of there being people who want to invest and play different and have different types of time horizon interest. This guy obviously has a lower time horizon on his plate, because he's just looking for rent and how he's going to make it. Whereas the person that invested in this had worked for however many years, or figured out how, like you're saying, through IOUs of dollars, charged up all of this energy and all of this money and value, and decided to channel it into a property. And I was like, hey, this property is not necessarily going to generate a bunch of money for me right now, but I think in the future it's going to be worth more. So I'm willing to like do things that maintain it through rent and other ways, so that way I can sell it at some point. So this is like an awesome deal. Everyone is kind of winning in this scenario, even though this guy doesn't think he's winning. To kind of further illustrate this point of like how good of a deal this is for him, like, imagine you had like, oh, I love this waterfront property. There's no house on it or anything like that, but I love it. It's going to cost $600,000 to buy the waterfront property, and it's going to cost another $400,000 to build a house on it. It's $1 million total, basically, to make it happen. And you go to somebody and say, hey, like, I want to live here. And they say, hey, that sounds great. Like, I will pay $1 million to buy the property and put the house on it. And over 30 years or however long you're living there, like, we're going to amortize that $1 million into X amount of payments. And you're going to pay it back to me. So at the end of 30 years, I have $1 million back. Like, that's a freaking fantastic deal, right? Like, you're getting something and you're able to realize the value of $1 million without ever having to have made $1 million in the first place. You can borrow from the future, and that's what renting essentially is you're borrowing from the future. But most of the time when you borrow, there's like an interest rate attached to it. So you're actually losing money in some way, or you're paying a fee to have that money. And hopefully you can turn it into more. Whereas for renters and landlord relationships, it's like, yeah, you get to reap the entire benefits of this person's entire life savings of work being channeled into this house. And even if they didn't buy the house outright in cash, you're reaping the benefits of their ability to have a job and the income and all of the different types of loan compliance that's required to own that house without having to actually do any of the work yourself. And you're basically getting it at cost. So it's a win-win for everyone. Tenants don't realize that they actually have a really, really good deal in this exchange.
Yeah, exactly right. I don't think I even have any more to add. I think that was well put.
Cool. Me neither. All right, let's move on to our last one. We've got the Libertarian Party. And they write, this is President's Day today as we're recording this. 82 years ago, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, ordering all Japanese Americans on the West Coast to be rounded up and imprisoned with no due process. Forgive us for not wanting the same government to decide who gets to own a firearm or not. What do you think?
I think this is something that needs to be screamed from the rooftops. It is, without a doubt, the most egregious example in recent history of the government stepping over the boundaries of civil rights so clearly in the name of defense and in the name of safety. I mean, there's no other example like it oh wait, no wait, oh I'm sorry, I forgot about COVID. Oh, I forgot about the Patriot Act. Oh, I forgot. But I think that this one is one that can speak to these modern examples of civil rights abuses from the government, where again with like COVID, with the shutdowns, they say, well, we have to be safe, and it's like 82 years ago, FDR said the same thing about Japanese Americans. Like, we need to get rid of them. They don't deserve due process because we need to make sure America's safe. We're in wartime or whatever. And we look back on that and we can so clearly see the rights of humans being abused in this manner, and the fact that this was never the right thing to do. And yet people will still go on as if the modern government actions that are sweeping civil rights abuses are justified because what about COVID? It's a disease. We're not safe. It's shocking to me that COVID, for instance, was such a I don't know what's the right word, such a disillusionment for like Penn, the magician guy, right? Who was a libertarian, right?
Yes.
And he
I think he still identifies as one, but
I don't think so. Not anymore. I don't. I think he's officially dropped the label because of
bummer.
COVID. Yeah,
but I mean, maybe good because he clearly didn't actually hold the philosophy truly.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and it's shocking to me. He's always said, "Well, this was one of the big questions I had with libertarianism is what about a pandemic?" And it's like, safety will always be the excuse for the civil rights abuses, wartime, terrorism, whatever it is. And so to me, this is FDR's executive order here with the Japanese Americans is an example of this is where they said that if you didn't do this, you were not going to be safe. They did this horrible action. People were imprisoned for no good reason, and their rights were violated. And basically, they got I'm sorry, and that's all that was there. And in the meantime, people were tremendously harmed. So, the gunpoint at the end is good. Not necessarily where I would go, but I think that's absolutely right. You don't want this kind of thing to happen again because it does show that the government would not put it past, or I wouldn't put it past the government to do something like this because they've done it before. And so gun rights are one of the sort of hegemonies we have against this kind of action on a mass scale. But even still, they did do the lockdowns, and they probably were not worse because of the guns we had. But even with the guns they had, they were still willing to go there. So it's not something that we should, say, well, we've got the Second Amendment, therefore we're okay. We constantly need to be vigilant and aware.
Do you think there's any relation between Order 9066 and Order 66 in Star Wars?
It's so funny because I saw the takes, or excuse me, the executive order on trending, and so I was like, executive order 99 or 6 order 66 like that. I'm like, is this a joke? And I'm like, oh no, this is actually the executive order for that.
And you think about like George Lucas talks about the Jedi were supposed to be kind of like Japanese samurai and stuff. I don't know. It seems kind of correlated. Maybe it's Lucas possible. Had a little bit of history in his history buff and making a point. I mean, I guess he was trying to with some of the political stuff in the prequel, so it wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, I remember I saw another little picture of like the graph of slavery in the United States, and it's like, hey, the first 200 years we had slavery, and then and it shows like the little green portion where we have the actual Civil Rights Act and everything like that, and the point making that's been so small. It's like, yeah, this is kind of the same point in a lot of ways, right? Like you would think that it had not been. It's been many years since we've done some sort of concentration camp style thing against a group of people, and it's like, nope, it's only been 82 years. Like that's one person away. There are people. I have one of my friends, he's Japanese, and his dad was in one of these camps as a kid. He's a lot older now, but it was in one of these as a kid, so it's like, it's not that long ago. And what's really funny, and I think maybe a white pill in all this, is that you read about the Japanese being put into these camps after World War II or during World War II, and then getting released. And during that time, their property was taken from them. Obviously, they were not able to work, and so they lost on a lot of different opportunities. All of the scenarios set up to like be a permanent, poverty class minority in the United States, and yet within about 40 years, Japanese Americans surpassed their white counterparts in terms of earning and the amount of household income and wealth in the United States. And so I think it's really a cool testament that despite the government, clamping down and systemically being against you, eventually freedom wins, and people are able to get out of that. And with the right type of mindset and the right type of virtues and values, you're able to improve your life. And so it's I try and take hope from that with this, because obviously this is terrifying, right? And we had people calling for this, like you're saying, with COVID here in the United States, and then they obviously implement it in Australia. It's like, hey, get the vaccine. If you don't get the vaccine, then you're a danger to society. If you're dangerous to society, then we need to put you with other people who are a danger in society, which just happens to be, in a tent in the middle of all this barbed wire. It's like, yeah, like that stuff is going to happen. It's the propensity of governments. It's not just FDR or not just the Chinese government or Nazi Germany or anything. It's the propensity of any government that exists to try and segment people that don't want to obey its authority and to destroy them. And like you're saying, we should shout this from the rooftops, because what keeps the government here in the United States in check, which enables us to not become like Australia, because given that nature of wanting to destroy people that don't agree with them, is the fact that we can also destroy them, or at least make it very, 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 very difficult and costly to do so by owning firearms. And that's why it's awesome that so many people here in the United States own them.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a fun exercise to ask the average person, what president in modern American history had sort of tried or successfully had 3 terms in office, was super racist against a group of people, and put a segment of the population in prison camps. And they'd probably be like, oh, that'd be Trump, because he's talked about the 3 terms and he wants to put gay people into camps and he's super racist. And it's like, nope, it's your progressive hero FDR, the one who set up all the systems that you love and all the policies that you support. Maybe you should reconsider your position and your allegiance.
Yeah, dude, I really do think, like, I'm thinking of Star Wars now, like, oh, the Chancellor who's been in long past his term ending. It's like, yeah, that he must be FDR, right?
Yeah,
like that's FDR to a T. Old and crippled and secretly evil and wanting unlimited power. The classic journey of any tyrant, aka every president. So yeah, we're not big fans of presidents on President's Day.
No, it's sort of the reverse of the hero cycles. The villain's election, or the villain's term, maybe, is the way we can sort of inverse the hero's journey.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if you don't have any more, I'm good on this.
No, we can wrap up.
Awesome. Well, folks, thanks so much for hanging out. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll catch you on the next episode.